The unimaginably horrific nature of the Vietnam War has somewhat made it a go-to occurrence for the use of satire. Films have often shown raw footage from the conflict overlaid with joyful music from the same era, which is to simulate the relative cluelessness and ignorance of mainstream culture, alongside the ironic nature of the melody when related to the subject matter of the lyrics. Some of the most famous comedic one-liners from Hollywood have been created through the topic of Vietnam, and this is because the comical elements are amplified due to the paradox of humor and war. Vietnam was the first war to be continuously caught on film and documented through the media, which gave many the false belief of perceptual understanding as they watched from home. Others, however, were aware they were still completely oblivious to the real nature of war despite the frightful imagery, and that only those in the picture would truly understand the significance of what they were watching.
On the fifth day of the Battle for Hue, the Marines moved out from the fortified Army compounds withstood the original attack and advanced into the empty, abandoned buildings of what was Hue University. Contact. The first sniper shots ricochet around the thick walls of the building, taking the first casualties of the first squad. The snipers, maybe only 2 or 3, are invisible in the buildings beyond the wall, but there is also a machine gun down the street to the left. The platoon leader has called his men forward. There is to be an assault.
Much is left in shambles. As the Marines advance, building after building, the North Vietnamese retreat, building after building, giving up nothing without a fight.
Roger, that was some sort of rifle grenade. It came all the way through the building, hit over the line. Have you pushed the ball?
In the front ranks of the Marines, a man is suddenly wounded.
Get him! Foreman, up there!
He's been hit in the eye by shrapnel from an enemy B-40 rocket. Despite the obvious pain, doctors later told him he will not lose the eye. And although the sound of the blast punctured his eardrum, he will not lose his hearing.
This last segment of footage mainly focused on the 3rd Division of the U.S. Marine Corps, yet serving alongside them, and who in fact conducted the majority of the fighting on that particular day, was the 23rd Infantry Division of the U.S. Army, with Alpha Company leading the attack, and with a single platoon acting as the spear. Taking point for that platoon, meaning he would be the first into a firefight, was 21-year-old Andrew Brannan, who on the same day as the previously shown footage would see his platoon leader get blown to pieces by a landmine. The following week, his actions in the field would later earn him the Bronze Star Medal for courage under fire. He would serve a second tour of Vietnam in 1970 with the same unit, and spent the majority of his time patrolling downrange in the jungle, an unpredictable, terror-filled hellscape, and where he would go on to earn his second Bronze Star for bravery in combat. He would lose a total of 14 comrades over his time in theater, and returned home with what would subsequently be diagnosed as severe PTSD. He would get discharged from the Army soon after, and began working for a utilities company in Covington, Georgia. It was around that time he would cross paths with his soon-to-be wife, Lynn Perry. They wed in 1975 and commenced an extremely turbulent marriage from the offset. Lynn would later testify that when Andrew was not troubled for whatever reason, he was a sweet-natured and kind person. But when he was troubled, he would have excessive anger and become not just verbally, but physically abusive. She stated that she would sleep outside for several nights in fear of her life, and eventually filed for divorce in 1979. Andrew's psychological decay seemed to accelerate from that point forward. PTSD was unrecognized at the time, and he was just one of millions whose mental trauma progressed untreated. After the divorce, he recommitted himself to learning and graduated from West Georgia College with a degree in geology. He secured a well-paid job with IBM, and although it was stressful, managed to hold it down for almost a year. But then tragedy struck. His 31-year-old brother and fellow Vietnam veteran committed suicide. He became an alcoholic soon after the war. His wife eventually left him, and then he killed himself by deliberate exposure to carbon monoxide. A few months later, his older brother, who also served in Vietnam, was killed in a plane crash while on a training assignment in the Army. This sequence of events caused a mental breakdown, and Andrew locked himself away in his parents' house for almost 2 years. His family found it difficult to engage him in conversation since the war, but after the breakdown, he became manic. He frantically and loudly blurted out the details of his time in combat as if reading from a script, which usually ended with a breathless tirade about politics or his ex-wife. His father would eventually convince him to see a therapist at the local counseling center, who then transferred him to the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Georgia. He was diagnosed with a severe form of PTSD, which had just been added to the DSM, and he was declared 100% disabled. He was fully aware and embarrassed by his instability, so he decided to withdraw from the human world altogether. The limited income he received from the VA helped support what became a mini-career in long-distance hiking. From 1985 to 1989, he trekked thousands of miles across the nation's most grueling terrain. Using military training and mapping skills, he prepared elaborate care packages and plotted drop-off points along the way, with his parents mailing the packages at pre-arranged times. When he finally returned home, and much to his mother and father's dismay, his mental state appeared to have gotten considerably worse, so they took him back to the VA medical center, who kept him hospitalized for nearly 2 months, as the treating psychiatrist felt sure he was a danger to society. The assessment described a toxic stew of depression, anxiety, confusion, anger, and explosive behavior. He talked rapidly and breathlessly throughout his 90-minute evaluation and had continuous inappropriate laughter. After his 2 months of hospitalization, he was enrolled in a long-term PTSD treatment in Augusta, where for the next 7 years he would continue intensive therapy, including a 6-month inpatient stint with other Vietnam veterans. One nurse at the facility reported she was afraid of him, stating he was the most unstable patient she had ever dealt with, mainly due to his uncontrollable rage. He was diagnosed as bipolar in 1994, which with the present day's accumulated research is known to be a ticking time bomb when combined with PTSD. He was then prescribed powerful antipsychotic drugs, which somewhat kept him on an even keel, but brought him no peace nor stability. Friends and acquaintances all continued to notice bizarre and scary behavior, which ranged from hyper-conversation with himself to talking loudly at others right next to him as if they were 50 yards away. His family then went out on a limb and got him a dog the following Christmas, which remarkably appeared to lift not only Andrew's spirits, but his cognitive state as well. He called him Moses, and according to the reports, absolutely adored that animal. They would spend the majority of their time together in the woods, and Andrew appeared to be considerably more at peace, even when around other people. The future was beginning to look positive, but it didn't last long. On January 12th of 1998, Andrew was 2 weeks late in refilling his prescription, the longest he had gone without medication since being diagnosed. On the way home from walking his dog, at exactly 5:38 p.m., his Toyota was clocked in at 98 miles per hour on a police radar. A less committed officer may have just let it go, but 22-year-old Deputy Kyle Dinkheller would not. His dash-mounted blue lights began flashing, and the Tacoma pulled over. Tragedy occurred over the following 3 minutes, as the police officer and veteran would engage in a ferocious firefight. Brannon drew an M1 carbine rifle out of his truck, got into a tactical stance, and began firing, at which point the deputy returned fire but was soon overwhelmed by his well-trained adversary. He was shot 9 times, with a fatal shot being fired into his right eye. Brannon was shot once in the lower abdomen. He got back in his truck and sped off to his self-built primitive camp house just minutes from the shooting. He grabbed a tarp from the front porch and then staggered off into the woods with his pet following close behind. He eventually collapsed under a tree. Law enforcement raided his cabin and the surrounding forest by dawn. Police dogs picked up his scent, and Brannon was found with his pet Moses still by his side. His wound was clotted by the cold, and his condition was stable. He was arrested and taken to the hospital, where he would admit to killing the officer. It was reported in the local news that Brannon told a detective, word for word, "I was trying to get to my land so I would be away from folks. I killed him so they can kill me. They can shoot me in the head. They can hang me from the nearest tree." PTSD is a recognized psychiatric disorder that would often grant someone the same leniency as those diagnosed with a mental illness. Brannon was an immense risk to public safety, and there was no doubt he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, or at least inside a high-security mental institution. But when you combine PTSD with a decorated military history, capital punishment wouldn't even be considered in most circumstances. A man committed a despicable and horrific crime, yet the origins of his undoing were clear for everyone to see, as they came from the harms done to him through his dedicated performance of assigned duties. Dozens of veterans, some of whom had never even met the defendant, would appeal for leniency, including servicemen from the Marines and Air Force. But their efforts were futile, as Brannon was found guilty of first-degree murder and rendered the sentence of death in late January of the year 2000. So what makes this case different than the others? Why have dozens of veterans been shown mercy for similar and even worse crimes when Brannon received nothing of the sort? The answer will always be a source of speculation, but the majority would agree that a single element had the most impact. And that brings us to the medium of video and its psychological impact on the viewer. Video cameras reached consumer markets in the United States in the late 1970s, yet they were mainly used by families to document special moments, such as birthday parties or weddings. They had little impact on police work until the mid-80s, and became widespread by the 1990s. Audio and visual documentation is now the norm when encounters with suspects occur, and this has been widely known to have a dramatic impact on legal proceedings. Compared to storytelling, the visual and auditory elements of video can influence a viewer's behavior to a far greater extent. Evoking the senses of both sight and hearing can spark subliminal memories of joy, sadness, anger, and fear. These emotional responses are what fuels perception and builds a stronger bond between the viewer and what they are watching, which in turn can greatly influence their decision-making as they feel more emotionally connected to the story. This is the reason video is seen as the most effective class of evidence and continuously used by both sides of the argument. To adequately understand its effectiveness for the state, we must also appreciate its effectiveness for the defense, and the case of Markeith Lloyd is a recent example. The 41-year-old murdered his pregnant ex-girlfriend outside her parents' home in Orlando, and many cited the motive as video. It resonates, and as stated earlier, can work for the defense, but also for the state, which takes us back to when Vietnam veteran Andrew Brannon was pulled over by Deputy Kyle Dinkheller for speeding, all of which was caught on video.
Driver, step back here to me. Come on back here for me. Come on back. How you doing today? Good. Come on back here. Keep your hands out of your pocket. Keep your hands out of your pocket, sir. Sir.
You goddamn it, here I am. Shoot my fucking ass.
Come here.
Here I am.
Sir, come here. 37 Radio 1078. Come here, sir. Sir, get back.
Where are you calling, motherfucker?
Sir, get back. Now. Get back. Get back. Sir, get back now.
No.
Get back.
Fuck you.
Sir, get back.
No.
I'm telling you now. Get back, sir. Sir, get back. Sir,
I am a
step
goddamn
back.
Vietnam
That's
combat
fine.
veteran,
Step back.
and I am not.
Sir,
Fuck
step
you.
back. Sir, step back now. Get back. Get back. Get back now. 1078, Radio 1018. Sir, step back now. Sir, get back now.
16.
Sir, get back. Get out of the car now. Sir, get out of the car. I didn't feel my life. Get back here now. Get to your vehicle. Put the gun down. Well, I got nailed the gun. I need help. Put the gun down. Put it down now. Put the gun down. Drop the gun now. Shit, stop now.
Compare what you just saw to how this exact occurrence was recounted to you at the start of this episode. You might not even remember what was said. This video, however, won't be forgotten as easily, which is the reason it's used nationally to advise police officers about the dangers of hesitation and indecision. Brannon should have been shot dead long before he had the chance to take cover and fire his weapon. The video inflamed the entire nation. But more importantly, the jury. It gave them tunnel vision on the tragic demise of the deputy, while the origins of the defendant's psychological undoing were driven into the dark and out of sight. Nearly 15 years later, on January 13, 2015, the state of Georgia executed him by lethal injection. He was 66 years old. His last words were, "I extend my condolences to the Dinkheller family, especially Kyle's parents and his wife and his 2 children. I am proud to have been able to walk point for my comrades and pray that the exact same thing does not happen to any of them. I'm glad to be getting out of this place."
I'd like to build the world a home and furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honey bees.